All right. I am going to start screen sharing again for part 2.
Okay. Everybody ready to go? Everybody reawakened? Doing okay? Good. Okay, so this section is really focusing in on your syllabi. So one of the things that we hope is that you'll walk away from this session and say, oh, I need to rethink certain portions of the syllabus in order to incorporate community-based learning. And so given the time, we're basically going to focus in on 4 aspects. One is the learning outcomes. Another is how to set up your community partner work. And again, that depends on your course and you and a whole bunch of other things. How do you prepare students to get involved and to work in the community, whether it's the research, the direct service, or the project-based work? And finally, what are some reflection and critical thinking activities? You can build them in. When do you build them in? What does it look like? We'll talk about all that. So we are a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's nice. And I think we'll jump right in, if everybody is okay, to learning outcomes. And I'll pass the hat to Everett.
Great. And then, so I think what I'm going to do with this slide is we've selected a different kind of quite a few learning outcomes from a few different subjects. And so I'm just going to give you guys a second to maybe read through this slide. And if there is one learning outcome that you think you could either apply to the CB course that you're thinking of creating, whether it's directly taking one that's on the screen, or if there's even one that you could maybe twist a little bit to fit, I think that would probably be the best way to utilize this slide. Obviously, you can kind of take one, like I said, make it your own, or even just directly take something that you feel like could directly apply. But yeah, I'll give you a minute or two to read them. And then if someone would like to share one that they found, particularly helpful, that'd be great. All right. Does anybody have one that they would mind sharing?
What's your question?
Just to read the sample learning outcomes and then either apply one of them to maybe the course that you're thinking of turning into a CB course, or also just maybe even if it directly relates, even just reading it out loud.
The first one was really, I think, can apply to any course for CB classes.
Great. Maybe one more person?
Is anyone seeing maybe how to adapt the language in someone else's learning outcome for your own course?
Come on, you guys. I know you don't like it when nobody raises their hand and you're asking a class question. So can someone participate?
I have a question though. Go ahead, Louis.
Okay, so I can read Luis's if his sound's not working. His was assess the needs of the community for Spanish interpreters, determine the toolkit that an interpreter would need to best serve the community, and how to connect both the community and interpreters looking forward. Reactions. He's asking for feedback. Anybody have a reaction to that?
I love it. I actually wonder if maybe
Yeah.
that could be 2 or 3 learning outcomes, because
Yeah.
it's like a lot for students to do in one.
That's a great idea. I agree. I agree.
Yeah, because it does look like some of this is more research, like how, what are the needs of the community, and what the toolkit could look like. So yeah, this might be multiple goals in one. Usually, what do most of you have, like 5 learning outcomes in a class, or a little bit more than that?
Each discipline does it differently. I think a lot of, especially introductory classes, have 4 to 5 big learning outcomes, but then there's
Yeah.
sub-levels.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Does that help you, Luis?
Yeah, so do you think I should trim them? I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear me. I turned
Yeah.
off,
Yes, we can.
excellent.
can
I
hear you.
turned off my modem. Sometimes that does it. It fixes
Mhm.
the Wi-Fi.
We
So
hear you.
because you mentioned that sometimes they have 5 learning outcomes, do you think I should keep these 3, or should I narrow them down?
Well, I guess one of the questions I have is your class also going to do an actual interpretation or translation project for an organization?
Yeah, I don't know it right now. Like, that's what I'm trying to decide, whether doing it project based or more direct service. Yeah, it's in the works. I think that's part of the beauty of developing a course from scratch, but it's also a challenge because, you know, like the first goal, assess the needs of the community for Spanish interpreters. I guess it also depends on the kind of organization that we end up working with,
Right.
because it's not the same to interpret for the Washington College of Law, because they said that they would be interested in students helping them translate for many cases that they deal with, or at a hospital, or at a school. So it would be very contingent upon the kind of organization, I'm guessing.
Can you tell everybody what your CB course is going to be? That will help them, I think.
Yeah, so I can read you guys the brief course description. It's called Community Interpreting, and it goes, the linguistic, cultural, and systemic barriers experienced by many Spanish speakers in the United States seriously limit their access to healthcare, education, and legal services, creating the need for qualified community interpreters that can walk the line between acting as mere conduits versus linguistic clarifiers, cultural brokers, and even advocates. In response to these needs, this course trains students with advanced Spanish proficiency in the fundamental techniques of community interpreting, serving as a gateway to potential collaborations with the clinical program at the Washington College of Law and elsewhere.
Interesting. So it's a brand new course.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to expand our Spanish translation certificate. So yeah, that's the goal.
Cool. Okay, anybody else have one they would be willing to read out loud and share, or pose and ask if we like it? Nobody?
Now you guys are experiencing what we went through when teaching classes online.
Right. I know, we should just start calling on people, right? Your participation will get you 40%, you know?
I think the exciting thing about this is it does take some imagination. It does take looking at your course materials. It take people some time.
Yeah. So what I do want to also tell you all is that my office, we're here, we're not kind of saying, go out and do it, you know, good luck, goodbye, you're on your own. We're really here to help with any aspect of this that we can help you with. So whether it's learning outcomes, whether it's assignments and grading, whether it's finding solid community partners, like that's what Everett and I can do. So, you know, feel free to let us know which pieces, you know, are you find more challenging, and we're happy to work with you. It's not like we're experts in all your disciplines, but I think in terms of the pedagogy, we're pretty familiar with at what point should you shift gears, because it's probably not going to work with a particular partner, or your students are trying and they can't get a response. Let's, you know, move on and find somebody else. So all those are things that we're happy to be there to support you.
All right, we're going to keep going. Marcy, I believe this is you selecting community partners.
Yeah, so I wanted to say from the start, like, as I just said, one of the areas I think that we're very strong in is finding community partners. And we set up certain venues and mechanisms to help you do that. So the first one I'll show you in a second is the directories. But the second one is, if everything is normal in the fall, and it's looking semi-normal, but not completely normal, we have there's a community partner fair on the quad in the fall, and we invite a lot of groups to come and talk to students directly. We do a brunch the last week in August, and we would invite you all to come and invite different partners to attend. And if you said, look, I'm teaching, you know, this course, please make sure you have partners that are working in whatever, environmental sciences, we'd make sure you had people there you could talk to in person. And then in January, we do kind of more of an on-campus fair. So we do a lot to create those bonds in different ways. Next slide. We will talk about whether it's faculty directed, kind of like what Gemma mentioned, or Amanda, and then others that are more student directed. But as you can see on this list, we create these directories. They're all online. And sometimes we find that there's one missing. Like, let's say a couple weeks ago, someone said, we need college access organizations. So we created a new one. It's not up here yet, but Farouz, who's online somewhere, created it for us. We have another one like on criminal justice organizations. So there's, I think, 12, but we actually have, I think, 16 altogether. And we are always updating them to make sure that the people who are the contact people are still on staff in the organizations. So this is a great resource. When we go, sometimes we go into classes to kind of, in the first week of school, to say, this is what CBL is about, and this is how we can help you students. We bring some of the directories, or we direct students to come back and pick up hard copies or scan them in and look at different options. So there are thousands of nonprofits in the DC area. We're so lucky. We're in an area that has so many groups that are doing great work in the community, and we will help you connect them. And I know that many of you, like Susie, you know, are people who are been doing this work a long time. So you probably all already know a lot of great organizations, but we're always open to new groups, and we welcome your input, and we do have a lot of resources. I guess that's the bottom line. Okay, next slide is, so is this me or is this you, Amanda?
This is me, but I think we can do it together, Marcy. So there are pretty much two models here, and there's a lot of discussion among faculty on having the student select a partner and faculty directed. So I'm going to tell you my philosophy. We're happy to do some discussion right now. I think that would make sense here. Faculty directed, I think generally this works better for first-year students, transfer students, even students in their second year or junior year who may be less familiar with DC. The idea here is the faculty member would choose 1 to probably 3 to 4 community partners per class. There would be in-class orientations. There would be handouts or materials posted online with specific volunteering times. There might be on-site orientations with classmates, and more resources online for the students to explore the options. So the thinking here is basically it takes away some of the legwork that student selected does, especially if you have first-year students who are becoming familiar with DC and logistics. My students almost overwhelmingly all love the idea of volunteering with Horton's Kids until some of them learn, okay, it might be an hour commute to the community resource center. I'm not as comfortable with Metro yet. I have to find my UPass or get a new UPass that I've conveniently lost since the semester started. Some students prefer Thrive. It's a shorter bus ride. They can quickly hop on it at Tenleytown. They can do some of their Target and other things in Columbia Heights while they're up there. It kind of depends on your student. I think giving students options or stating what the option is in the course description is the best idea for everybody. So for instance, in my writing 101 class where students can choose between Horton's Kids, Thrive DC, DC Reads, or another community partner we agree on, it states the community partners in the course description. In my complex problems class where they have to volunteer with Horton's Kids, I state Horton's Kids' name and add a link to Horton's Kids so they can start to do some of that research themselves. Okay, we have a few questions already.
Great.
Okay. I think, again, it depends on the students. There are definitely first-year students that are happy to pick their own community partners. I think pick what works best for your students. I know especially for my students in a writing class when I'm also trying to teach them how to research well, how to integrate scholarly research, it kind of takes away one of the obstacles. Student selected. Marcy, take it away.
So the class I teach, I have had students look at the Latino directory, which is kind of broken down by youth organizations, senior citizens, immigration, housing and homelessness, and get involved in an issue they care about. I have found in recent years, a lot of students are very, very concerned, not surprisingly, about what's going on around immigration in the country. So many of them have volunteered either with the Capital Area Immigration Reform Coalition or CARECEN, the Central America Resource Center. One is more of a hotline, but you could go to the actual detention center on a Saturday for 8 hours and translate. Yeah, obviously, in some cases you have to have Spanish. CARECEN has been a great place for helping with citizenship training. And interestingly, sometimes the people in the classes are the Aramark janitorial staff who are taking classes there. So that really brings it home how those issues are so connected to our life at AU. So I just let students pick based on what they care about, but I also say, probably when you introduce yourself to the organization, and in our directories we have email addresses for people or volunteer at, I say you should probably write to 3 groups because 1, you may not get a response, and 2, the time that you are free to go may not match what the organization needs. So there aren't that many sites that have like Saturday hours, but some of our students are really busy and they need to go on a Saturday. So therefore, you know, I'll help them find a site. So I ask them to write to a few, and then often the site will want to see their resume or talk to them in person or via phone. And then they'll select a site, and then they'll have to hand in like a form to me that says, this is the site I'm going to be at. This is my contact person. This is their email. This is their phone. And kind of vaguely, this is what I'm going to be expected to do. So yeah, I give them a certain date by which they need to say, this is what my community-based learning site will be. But does it work 100% of the time? No, it does not. And sometimes I have to say to them, like, come in and I'll get on the phone and I'll call a few organizations and we'll make the match directly. I mean, there's always 1 or 2 students where you do have to kind of get a little more actively involved, and that's fine. That's fine with me. So Susie, I feel like you had some comments, so why don't you chime in?
Okay, I just unmuted myself. I wanted to let people know that in the DC metro area, there are approximately 20,000 nonprofit organizations. So besides the fabulous database that Marcy was talking about, there's also idealist.org that people can find a host of other nonprofits and volunteer opportunities. And the other thing I wanted to let people know, I deal with a lot of international students year round. In the fall, I deal with mentorship students, and my students are first year. The international students are second semester. and they pick their volunteer opportunities depending on the cause that they're interested in. So they prefer doing it that way. Plus, it's an opportunity for them to figure out how to reach out, and they're developing other skills by doing that. And I also, I teach, I'm a popular education practitioner, so I believe in bottom up, and it actually helps enhance their citizen engagement skills and learning about participatory democracy.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Other comments, reactions, thoughts about this?
I think just emphasizing choose what works for you and the audience in your classroom. I definitely have students who they do better when they choose a nonprofit or a cause connected to that nonprofit that works for them. That's why I always keep it open to a fourth partner in my class. I do think working with students to figure out community partners that would be appropriate. So an example of when this has not worked in the past, a student several years ago wanted to volunteer with RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. The training process for RAIN is over 40 hours before you can get on the phone. That is not appropriate, probably for any undergraduate to do in one semester in addition to their course load. So we looked at different options, and that student actually started to volunteer with a women's program in DC, which I can't honestly remember the name of right now, that had similar goals to supporting survivors, but had a lower entry level. Another example was students wanted to volunteer with HIPS several years ago, but the training was also time consuming. And at that point, HIPS only had volunteer opportunities Friday and Saturday nights, overnight on H Street. So especially for first year students who are less familiar with DC, that were under the age of 21. And when you added that in with some of the training that they needed, we decided there might be different organizations that could work. So those students ended up volunteering with Iona Senior Services. Again, I think supporting your students and giving them structure during this process is important. So if it's going to be student selected, then working with them to figure out who are appropriate partners.
I also want to interrupt for a moment. If anybody's going to work with children or youth, there are background checks that they have to go through, and sometimes that can last for a whole semester. So you need to be prepared for that.
Oh my God, that is so important. I'm so glad you pointed that out. That's absolutely true. If you're working in a school and certain youth organizations, students have to get on it right away because it could take too long and not make the whole experience feasible. Good point. I also want to mention, sometimes I've had my students start out working on something that looked like direct service. They were working with a nonprofit out of Cardoso High School, and it was a college access program, and they were supposed to like help students work on, with Latino Student Fund, work on college essays, okay? And as they were, you know, sitting down at a computer with some of the immigrant high school students in this program, they found out that what the organization really, really needed was kind of a guide to college scholarships for undocumented students. So the work continued in part as direct service, but it ended up producing this great guide / manual that had like 15 different scholarships and the links and the narratives, so they could share that, and that got widespread use because the organization felt like, wow, that's going to impact a broader number of people altogether. So sometimes work can actually take on new shapes and forms that are super beneficial and impactful.
Hazen had a really good question. She wanted to know if we could talk about the oversight, time investment for different models. So one of the reasons I do like, especially in this first year classes, having 1 to 4 community partners. One, it gives the students kind of like a pod of people that they're volunteering with and that they can commute with and they can coordinate projects with and they can talk about these issues with. When we do in-class reflections, they generally have someone who's sharing or at least understands the issues they're talking about. Oversight-wise, I have students just use a discussion board on Blackboard and they log their hours. So there's different times throughout the semester that they have different hours due by. So I just have to go in and I'm like, okay, do you have 10 hours? Cool, you get the credit. You don't have 10 hours? Okay, you have 5. Well, maybe it's somewhere in the BC range. And then we talk about it. So that's worked for me. I know other faculty have many different models. I also, to be honest, I like having the students volunteer at a couple of nonprofits. So if something does happen, I hear about it. So an example, several years ago, a young woman had attended the same classes as everybody else. I thought she had gotten the message to let the children at Horton's Kids start talking to you, to be more understanding about that sort of thing. And the student went in the first day asking children questions like, does your dad live with you? Did your mom go to work today? Really personal questions that are not appropriate for a student to be asking a child from Horton's Kids on the first day of tutoring. And I found out about it from another student. So we talked during office hours, and part of it was the student hadn't been paying attention in class. The student thought they were doing it gently and sensitively. But it's also, I'm finding out about that through other students. So I'd also rather address those issues in my classroom sooner rather than later. I don't know if that's always possible if people are volunteering with maybe 19 different nonprofits. Although I think 19 would be a lot for any class.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions on this section? I do find, and because I might have 10 different groups that my students are volunteering with, I write each of them, and once I get like the little form that says who's the contact person, I write to them, I introduce them, I thank you for taking, you know, Melissa and Carlos at your organization. I send them the syllabus for the class, and I say, please let me know if you have any concerns or things aren't working out, or you know, there's any circumstances I need to know or the students need to know. So I try and open that communication. Overall, I haven't had that much follow-up. A few people like thank me for seeing the syllabus, but I have had a couple times where the students were totally unreliable and didn't go on time and totally messed up, like the person they were doing the citizenship training for, and that really was problematic because we want to be responsible partners, and I want them to say, yeah, AU students are fantastic and accountable and they'll show up on time. So it's not just like, oh, tell them students your grade's going to drop. It's really that you want to represent us well and be someone that the university and the campus partner wants to work with.
I think this also comes back to phrasing it to your students in a way that also makes sense with the course goals. So for instance, with that student who was asking really personal and appropriate questions the first day of tutoring, I say, you know, we need to think about audience here. This is true for any writing assignment, for any rhetorical situation. Is it appropriate audience-wise to be asking somebody that you just met on the first day of tutoring? And that's when we sort of get into what did the student miss in class? What did they misunderstand? And it's that learning moment. Do I want low-income children from Anacostia to be teaching my student this? Yes and no. I mean, this is the kind of thing that they're going to learn in a community-based learning class. And if I can be a faculty member to have that tougher conversation during office hours and help a student think about what they could do differently next time, that's what I'm interested in, if that makes sense. I really try to phrase it to students in how are we thinking about this in terms of the class, and how are you showing me that you're practicing these community-based learning concepts through your choices in the community. Cool. And we have more coming up on preparing, oh, here we go, preparing students for community involvement. Okay. So I believe we're going to do another breakout room here. Marcy, are we still good on time to do that?
Yeah, I think we're a little bit ahead of time. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to send you into breakout rooms again. How do people feel with the size of the first set of breakout rooms? Did that seem okay?
We only had 3 people. I don't know if there are more. I was in a group 4.
Okay. I'm going to try to do groups of 3 and 4 again. So if everyone can take a look at this slide, and while I put people in breakout rooms, if somebody, Everett or Lindsay or Marcy, could copy and paste what's on this slide into the chat so it gets to everybody, that would be excellent.
Okay, who's going to do it?
I'm doing breakout rooms, so it's going to be one of you. Actually, we could do the same rooms as earlier, it looks like. So I think I'm just going to
maybe
I'll post the stuff.
Okay.
How many minutes is the breakout break?
Some people have actually left, so I just want to let you know the group might be a little smaller.
How many minutes do we have?
Marcy, how many minutes do we have for this? About 5 to 7, I think.
Mm-hmm. That
Okay.
sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't see the questions. I'm so sorry because our little photos are in the middle of it. So
I know it's annoying, these photos. I'm having a hard time
no,
too.
it's okay. It's okay. So you guys are gonna cut and paste them?
Yeah, I'm going to cut and paste them right now.
I think Lindsay said she would do it.
Oh, she can.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I'm moving people to breakout rooms. Are we cool?
Yes. We
All
just
right.
need the questions. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hold on a sec.
There it is.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay. See you all in say 5 to 7 minutes, okay?
Mhm.
Lindsay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So is there a way the people's pictures can they go across the top or the bottom so it doesn't block the slide so much?
You can drag them over.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a personal choice. So each person can either have them on the side or drag them up to the top or the bottom.
Okay, yeah.
Bruce, I know it says that it assigned you to a breakout room. I'm trying to undo that and it's not letting me. So don't go to breakout room. You're fine.
Okay. Got it.
So when you say drag, I'm looking, it doesn't get, that's not one of the little things on the top. How do should I just hold on to it or?
Yeah, if you hold on to the top black bar and just drag it up, it should kind of swing over on its own.
Okay, I can move it to the left. I'm trying to think of how to make it go vertical. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you just kind of drag it over to the top, it'll realign itself.
Oh, I see. Okay, cool. No, it didn't happen. Oh, got it. Got it. Got it. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because so many times it's been blocking the slides, and fortunately I have a hard copy in front of me, but good tip. Thank you.
No problem.
So right now we're at preparing students for volunteering 305, right?
Yeah, I think this is where we're going to lose all that time we gained because I think we're going to have a bunch of questions on inclusion and diversity and all of those messy identity questions.
That's okay.
Cool. I mean, we're starting to get more of those questions now anyway, so.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, we have the rest of this section, the preparation for volunteering and those subsets and the critical thinking and reflection activities. We basically have till 3:55 if we need it.
Cool.
And this is, for a while, it's mostly you unless you want me to do the map. And then critical thinking will be Everett.
Cool. Yeah, I'm curious how the other faculty institutes go this week. I feel like
Most of them are a lot shorter than ours, I'll tell you that.
Is that it?
Yeah. Right, Lindsay?
Yeah, we have 2 tomorrow that are only about maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours a piece. It might even be less. And then Thursdays is about the same as your all's.
Oh.
Is Thursday complex problems or core?
No, Thursday is open educational resources.
Oh, yeah.
And then the teaching and core is split up tomorrow, the two of them.
Got it. Nice.
I'm glad that Susie brought up the thing about the background checks, because that for like DC Reads, that does take a long time.
No, true. And I mean,
Does Horton's kids require a background check?
no, because they started putting my students into community resource center, which sped that all up.
Hmm.
If they were doing tutoring, yes.
Hmm.
So I can clarify that coming up in the preparation aspect.
Mhm.
I mean, I love the idea of letting students pick their own partners, but 19 to 22-year-olds don't always anticipate all of these things.
Right. I agree.
I think also giving them an area like, okay, within this area, so at least class discussion or reflection gets a little easier. That's another way to do it.
Yeah.
I think it's going okay. How do others feel?
Oh yeah, I think this is going great.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, I think from what I'm seeing in the chat too, it seems like there's a good amount of people that are really invested in this information.
Mhm.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah, of course.
Bruce, is it helpful to you since you're kind of new to all this?
Yeah, I honestly think I'm learning a lot more about the kind of practical function and how community-based learning really works in the classroom. So yeah, this is really great for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you can see why when we get like those emails in the volunteer box, directing them to the right person is important. It could be Everett for the CSLP. It could be a whole class. Like maybe an organization wants 5 people, and we could figure out who among faculty we would say, why don't you talk to this person and get it set up? So yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of options.
I just realized something. How long have they been in breakout rooms?
Maybe 5 minutes already?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Anybody else keeping time? I
Have
wrote it
not
down
been
as
keeping
0
time.
to 12.
I think it's been about 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's
You
I'll
want
do
to ask
breakout.
them to finish up in one or 2 minutes, and then we'll start?
Yep.
So are we actually going to talk about when is the background knowledge and the personal preparation and the logistical? Do we actually talk about logistical or not so much?
Hold on. Let me look at the PowerPoint.
I think if we don't, it's fine. They might ask, like, what about
Yeah.
transportation, right?
I mean, logistical issues to me would be things like make sure your students have their U-passes, telling them where to go to get a new U-pass, because there's inevitably always a student in every single freaking class who does not know where their U-pass is.
Yeah.
Explaining to students that even if their class does have a budget, like complex problems, ride sharing probably not going to be reimbursed by the university unless it's an extreme situation.
Right.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to a breakout room. Someone asked for help.
ready to go?
I think Amanda popped into a room.
Okay. So Lindsay, is this going pretty much smoothly in your?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
we are ready to come back. We have a lot of questions. Marcy, I'm just preparing for this one. The group that called me to a breakout room wants to know about liability. And are there forms from the university? So I can speak to the form that Complex Problems has me fill out liability-wise that I also use for my writing classes. But it's probably going to be different depending on which school you're in. And I think especially if we keep growing CP, we need to have a more uniform, formal answer on this one.
Yeah, I don't, right now we don't use any liability forms. Do we ever?
Not that I know of, no.
We only use it when it's like photography or transportation issues.
Okay, so this question is going to come up. I can speak to what I do for CP and writing classes because I do them for both of those. But one of the faculty rooms is very nervous about this. So
Okay, well, I can what's his name in Justin, whatever, Perillo?
Yep.
I can always go to him, but right now we don't have for this particular program. Okay,
okay, I'm closing the breakout rooms.
cool.
Do. All right.
So right now we're on slide
35.
35, yeah.
Okay, hold on, I'm restarting the slideshow.
Wow, 15 more, okay.
Okay. No, I can't start slideshow before I screen share. All right. It looks like we are still waiting on quite a few people. But the breakout rooms, I think, are going to eject them in 14 seconds. So we shall see.
Eject them, I like that.
Oh, there we go.
Wait,
All right. Is everyone back?
yeah,
All right. I know we have quite a few questions here, and part of the challenge with this slide is sort of anticipating the logistical issues, the type of preparation, and the background knowledge your students need. Let's start finding out what our questions are. What did you guys talk about in your breakout sessions? What do we have in the chat? Okay. All right. Rebecca, let's pick on you because Gemma just outed you as having a question.
So we were talking about this kind of spectrum of experiences that we might have with the community-based learning, where we have some students that are maybe like 24 and older that are
Yes.
kind of a little better groomed and maybe a little more sensitive to how they're presenting themselves as a member of the community, versus students in complex problems courses that might not have as much experience with that. The note in the chat was one of the last things we ended on here was that it might be powerful to have near peer experiences. Gemma, or near peer kind of like integration into the learning environment for the earlier students, like for the younger students. Gemma was saying that she has students who've already completed the course come in and talk to the other students so they can get kind of like firsthand stories that are, teaching through stories is so powerful. And like the story that Amanda shared earlier was, just really eye-opening. And so if the students could hear firsthand experiences like that, it might be a good way to kind of like get at this this grooming process, or get them better prepared for being a representative of the university and the community.
I agree, totally. I think if there's some way to at least get a few students from a range of your students to come talk about their CBL experience and what your students wish they knew. So for instance, I had a number of former IAP students who are Chinese in my complex problems class in the fall. And for some reason, the children from Horton's Kids asked every Chinese student if they were Spanish. And it was kind of perplexing until I thought about it, and it happened literally to every single Chinese student in the class. And there were 4 Chinese students in the class. And it clicked, and it was most of the children from Horton's Kids have had white volunteers or Black volunteers and some Latino volunteers. They have not had as many Chinese volunteers, if any, before.
Yeah.
So the students who don't have an experience with diversity beyond their neighborhood and their volunteers and the staff from Horton's Kids and who's teaching at their school, they assumed that someone who was Chinese was Spanish because that's the next language they knew people spoke a lot. So we talked about having one of the students from last fall come in and warn my students about this, / tell her how she dealt with it. So my students started teaching children from Horton's Kids Chinese words. They started talking about, here's where China is on a map. And the kids from Horton's Kids were like, wait, you can travel that far? Like, it didn't occur to them, all of these different things. So instead of being something to make my Chinese students more anxious about it, we kind of prepare them now. And I do that with similar things. I say to most of my students, you know, at some point, a child from Horton's Kids might ask where your children are. And my students are always like, why would I have a child? I'm in college. I'm like, right, but some of them have moms who are 21 years old.
Good point.
And if you were 20 years old, I mean, they asked me this when I was a young intern years ago. So I think it's also a point to think about who is the audience in your classroom. If you have 25-year-old students, I could easily see a child at Horton's Kids asking if you were married. There was a young man in one of my classes this spring who had a ponytail, and they were very concerned if he was a boy or a girl because they didn't know of any boys with ponytails. So again, thinking about audience-wise, what are some things that you need to prepare your students for? I think we know a lot about our students' lack of understanding or lack of experience with certain types of diversity, but the communities they're entering might also have more limited experience with certain types of diversity. So it's something to keep in mind. And I think it's going to be different depending on the audience in your class.
I didn't get a chance to bring this up during our breakout room, but I will be teaching an ecology complex, urban ecology complex problems course. And one thing that I was a little concerned about was thinking about safety, because I was planning to have some like mapping process or like asking students to go into the community and map places they hadn't been before. I was just wondering if you could talk a moment about what kind of safety training in the urban environment for students who might not be familiar with being in a big city.
Right. Everett, if you want to jump in here, because you often sit in on the initial conversation about this. So there's a couple things here, and I think this is also related to another question that popped up in a group about liability forms. Depending on which program and school you're in, there are different requirements. I've asked Marcy to do a more formal check-in about standardized forms across the university, but I know, for instance, with writing studies and complex problems, I have a liability form from the university that I have all the students fill out. And it's something from risk management, and it's similar to a field trip form. It's also something apparently faculty have used for other community-based or DC-based experiences. We do talk about safety. We talk about things like, what kind of backpack are you carrying? There was a young woman who was volunteering in my class with Horton's Kids, and she had a Louis Vuitton purse. So she said this would probably not be a great idea to bring on the metro and bring to Anacostia. And I said, honestly, no, I would pick a different backpack. One of the volunteer coordinator for Horton's Kids actually explained this in a really clear way. He said that he thinks about privilege, and he doesn't want to walk into the tutoring site every day with a Starbucks cup, because it's kind of advertising that he has the privilege to spend $4 to $5 on a cup of Starbucks, right? We say the same things to students. So maybe put your AirPods away before you go into tutoring. Most of the children have a cell phone, but keep your phone away, because you shouldn't be using your phone during tutoring anyway. You're setting a good example for the children. They're not allowed to use them either. Thinking about dress-wise, you're metroing, you might have to walk, you want to be comfortable. So you want to look somewhat professional, but you also want to look comfortable and ready to move on the metro, possibly walk up and down the steps of a bus, that sort of thing. So a young woman in the class, for instance, who liked wearing high heels said, so I shouldn't wear high heels. I'm like, no, but I'm sure there are boots that are authentic to you, or sneakers, or something that might be more comfortable in public transit. So that seemed to make sense to them. I don't like telling students what they can and cannot wear. I think it's very different for each person. I tell the students to dress authentically, but safely for them, if that makes sense. I think we're getting into this next slide, which is about preparing students. I think especially depending on what age your students are, you may have to devote more time than you think to preparing them. Most of my students have started asking, especially in complex problems, because we spend a lot of time talking about DC and the different wards, income, racial disparities, this sort of thing. Most of our students, unless they are volunteering in Anacostia, unless they are doing a group project in Anacostia, they do not step foot in Anacostia. They don't know at the beginning of the course where Anacostia is, for instance. So I spend pretty much a whole week, for instance, in complex problems. It's sort of DC week. So we talk about there are 4 quadrants. There are 8 wards. Here's the difference in income based on ward. Here's the difference based in race on ward. Our students are coming from states where they're very used to, and our AU students are very politically informed. This idea that we don't have representation in Congress, like, you need to actually spend some time explaining this, because it does not make sense to them. They may have seen the license plates, but they really need more of a background on why this is part of the reason that DC has certain pockets of need like it does. I have a couple of links in here under suggested topics with some options that I love for doing this in class. There are a couple of really cool Google overlay maps that developers have come up with. So one talks about income, one talks about ward, and it shows like where are the boundaries of Ward 8, depending on street. I think these really interactive tools that we now have access to, especially with our students having computers in a classroom, and I'm even thinking about if we are remote in the fall, how these options could really help and support community-based learning.
Amanda, could you for a second just go ahead to the map so as you're describing it, people can kind of see it visually?
Yes, so I'm gonna have to stop screen sharing for a sec to do that. There was another question in the chat while I'm clicking the links, if somebody could start.
No, I mean the maps in our PowerPoint, that's what I meant.
Oh, okay, hold please.
Sorry about that.
Nope, you're fine.
Just like 2 down, I think.
Yep. Here we go.
So I just want to reiterate, I think it is important we all be informed about some of the basics about DC in order to encourage our students to learn. So if we don't know that there are 8 wards or 4 quadrants, or more or less that there's less than 1 million people, and that it used to be a majority African-American city, but now it's only about 46%. All these are things that I think require deeper preparation on our part in order to make sure our students recognize that these are important demographics. And even though the median household income looks kind of high, if you compare our ward with Ward 6, with Ward 7 or Ward 8, it's dramatically different, just like the impact of COVID is dramatically different in different wards, just like unemployment rates are dramatically different. So I was even thinking maybe at some point we could do like a little introduction to Washington, DC class with CTRL at some point to, prepare us all, because these things do change a lot, but I think we need to make them real for our students, or they're going to think that Columbia Heights and DuPont Circle and Tenleytown are Washington, DC.
Good. And if you click that link too, if you're following along the PowerPoint at the bottom, there's more resources and readings. There's a reading my students love from NPR last year. It's called Anacostia Rising, and it's talking about the Anacostia River, what makes the Anacostia River so much different than the Potomac, for instance. The increasing gentrification in Anacostia. One other thing students really liked about that reading, it also has audio. So they didn't just have to read the article, they could also listen along like it was a podcast. Okay, we have 2 questions in the chat.
We also have to do report outs from the groups, no?
Yes, we have to do more of that. I can send along. Lindsay, can you help me get the liability and safety forms that I have from CP and writing classes on the CTRL website?
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. Okay. So let's come back to this. What other concerns did you talk about in your groups, guys? What kind of background knowledge or personal preparation do your students need?
I was volunteered actually. So if I may, I would just say that we got lucky. We had Susie in our group, and mainly she was sharing her experience with us. And she mentioned it was kind of really, really nice to hear that we have that opportunity, that the first half of the semester, she dedicates to make her so she dedicates to that her students have the necessary background, the knowledge, what they're going to do, what the challenges are going to be, everything. So by the second half, when the time comes that they really are going into the community and start doing their learning and service, they have that the knowledge, everything they need, well, as much as possible by everything. So they are ready to go and do their work. And the another really interesting aspect is even international students, and Susie specifically mentioned Chinese students, even they're ready. We would assume that they're not familiar with the area, they're not familiar with the neighborhoods, they don't know communities, the issues, etc., all the issues. But after that time, they're all prepared and they're ready to go. And well, Amanda was mentioning a couple of issues, what you prepare, and I'm assuming everything is done in those classes. And she also mentioned that the key in this whole project and this whole learning issue is, as we all keep mentioning, is reciprocity. So they know what they're expected and they know what they're what is expected of them. So basically we were talking about how it is being done, and that it is being done, and the students are prepared, and the background is not really an issue. So that would be pretty much. If I missed something, please jump in, especially you, Susie, because we were taking advantage of you knowing more than we do.
No, I've just been doing it a long time, and I'm old. No, I think you summed it up pretty well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we asked Susie if sometimes the students get a little bit impatient because they want to go out to the community, but she told us that if you use like a Socratic method and encourage, dialogue in the class, they don't get impatient. So they actually appreciate it.
And I'm sorry, if I may, also MJ, she mentioned that they do a lot of reading, like research, but we run out of time. She never had a chance to finish her thought. So maybe she could jump in and say now, but the idea was doing a research, reading and discussing articles and news and everything. And then after that I didn't have a chance to hear because the groups were so MJ, if you had something to add, please. And we can't hear you. We still can't hear you. No, we can't.
All right. Oh, yeah, I planned on those things after researching on the sustainability issues. We read articles and we actually did a tour, the annual tour too, and it was like a guidance. And after that, we were planning on, around Earth Day, to do some community services. I contacted, people, with the events too, but couldn't make it. Yeah, due to the pandemic. So because of that, I wondered, what could it do, in case of in the virtual volunteer work, or in that case, yeah, that was a logistical issue at the time. That's it.
I wanted you to add something about the tour idea. There's this group called Cultural Tourism DC, and they have these little brochures on a whole bunch of different neighborhoods. They're in English and in Spanish. And I have a lot of samples here. You can get them for free. And it helps you do like a guided tour. And each of the neighborhoods has like these signs with photographs with a lot of history. So I find those very helpful if you're trying to get an understanding of the history of the community and some key locations. In my course, I always do a walking tour of Mount Pleasant, because that is a neighborhood that has the most kind of history with the Latino immigrant community coming like in the late 70s and 1980s. So I use the brochure and we walk, we do, 20-minute walk and talk about the history. Sometimes I've actually invited somebody from Cultural Tourism to come with me, and they've done it for free. And then we end up, because it's a block class, we have the advantage of 2.5 hours. And then we end up stopping at Haiti's restaurant on Mount Pleasant Street, having dinner there. I invite some guests, and then Haiti, who's been the owner, but she's been here since she was like 13. She always talks to the group too. And then she also gives us a great discount. So if you have the advantage of a block class, getting out into the community with your students is a huge advantage for introducing them to the neighborhood and important locations and sites. But Cultural Tourism DC, we can later on add that link in, because those are super helpful. I see a few people nodding heads, so I guess you've used them already, huh?
Thank you.
One thing that also makes this idea of going out into the community with your students, our students, if they are undergrads, all have a UPass. It is included in their tuition fee. And the UPass works on Metro, DC Bus. It does not work on the circulator anymore, which we learned the hard way with my complex problems class in the fall. But the circulator ride fare is now back to $1. So that's also an option. Students also really liked the circular route when we did use that, because they got to see a whole different area of the city than they did on the Metro. If they need a new UPass, because there's inevitably one person in every single class who has no idea where their UPass is magically, they need to go to public safety. And they can charge it to their student account, but I believe it is $20 for a new UPass. So that has come up literally every semester since UPass has been a thing, and it is helpful information for all faculty to know. So we've solved one problem for everybody right now. I think that was all the groups. Am I making that up? No? Okay. So we're going to keep going here. I think also in terms of transportation, especially if your students are community service, especially if it's farther away, and by farther away I mean outside of the Tenleytown area, spend some time in class practicing transportation apps. Teach your students how to use Trip Planner on the Metro website. Teach them how to use apps like Move It, Here We Go, and DC Rider. One thing that I've started doing in complex problems, and I started doing it in writing 101, I literally come up with 3 or 4 different scenarios, like, okay, this is the day that the red line is on fire, literally, so you cannot use the red line to get to your service site. How else could you get there? So it's teaching your students how to use it in a controlled environment in the classroom. They see the different problems. They learn how to save the addresses in. And all these things, I mean, we've all been on Metro and tried to use an app. How many times have you been on Metro and apps have failed? If they get used to using these in your classroom and they can troubleshoot with everybody, and you kind of make it into a classroom activity, I think it's actually a lot more manageable for them. Other things we've already started to talk about, if you do have things like a block class or a co-curricular or some kind of encouraged in-class community time from your discipline or your program or your department, we really encourage using it. It's valuable time that your students will feel more successful and more prepared later on to participate in the community.
I think it's also valid to ask your community partner to sit down with your student, give them a little talk on history of the organization, and give them a little walk around the block, and this is the neighborhood, and these are some important locations, and these are whatever buildings that have some connection to our initiative. So sometimes they think of that on their own, but I think you can also prompt them and say, we'd really appreciate it if you would do that for the students, because that will help them understand your work so much better.
I think if you're doing student selected, I would also encourage the students to attend the same kind of orientation that other volunteers go through. Make your students go through those same steps. I think, again, it depends on who your students are and where they're volunteering and the issues, but I think whatever background they can have on the neighborhood, the better. Certainly.
For a lot of those organizations, orientation is mandatory before they're even allowed to do the volunteer service. It's like DC Food Bank,
Yep.
So Others Might Eat, Martha's Table, and so on.
My students have asked before, like, can we have all of the organizations do an orientation class? And I usually have the 2 primary partners, and then the others, I'm like, go to their orientation, because you're also going to be getting orientation with the other new volunteers. So there's something to be said for them learning how to work with the other adults who will most likely be at that site. So, okay. If I can find my arrow, we've looked at some of these maps. There are more resources. I think, especially depending on what your discipline is, if you're talking about the DC community, this is a great way to do a deep dive into whatever you need to be doing in your course. So I could see people in sociology making this work for them. I could see this working in history. I could see this working in economics class. I think there's a lot of flexibility here. Any questions on these 2 slides? All right. So again, just trying to punch up some of the slides. This is from their first co-curricular for the complex problems class. So we did that metro trip together, and they got a tour of the Community Resource Center. This is one of the less glamorous rooms in the bottom picture, but it's one of their supply rooms. So they have a food pantry for parents. They have a diaper bank. They have winter coats. So our students seen up close and in person in the Community Resource Center how Horton's Kids supports the community in less obvious ways that a 19-year-old may not see. That was really eye-opening. And it's something my students have written about in reflections even after we stopped volunteering in the community. They're very concerned how is Horton's Kids supporting the community. And a lot of their resources right now are going towards keeping the food pantry stocked, the diaper bank stocked, and just basic needs met for families. All right, here's the exciting one. Identity, diversity, and inclusion skills. I think most of us need to anticipate spending more time on this than we may have 5 years ago. I will be honest, in student evaluations, this is the big thing that students point to, either wanting more time on it, wanting more focused preparation on it. And since I've started to refocus my classes and really spend as much time as I can in the beginning preparing students and talking about the issues that will affect them in their volunteering, the evaluations have gotten stronger and the students have had more productive experiences. So I think there's a lot going on here. I think you need to keep, when you're having these conversations in the classroom, both communities in mind. The CBL placement in your community and the community in your classroom. You want to prepare students to contribute respectfully, reciprocally, and civilly in both spaces. I tell my students that I don't want to encourage a quote unquote cancel culture in the classroom, but part of CBL is learning about people that belong to other communities. And I can't anticipate everything that you don't know. So I try to be transparent with my students and I try to encourage them through the different options that we have in a class, formal and informal reflection, class discussion, discussion questions, office hours, small group projects, all the places where they can do this learning. I think all of us have an obligation to think about what issues related to identity, privilege, and race will our students explore and experience in their CBL placements. I know some of the things that Marcy has pointed to in her classes are not the same things that my students have experienced. So again, I think it takes doing a little bit of homework on what the nonprofit is and knowing that community. I think one way to do this in a manageable way, so we're still supporting our student learning, supporting them for these tougher moments in the community, is to look at the learning outcomes for your class and think how to connect the learning outcomes to the nonprofit and what you need to be doing. So the example in the last column, one of the learning outcomes for complex problems is diverse perspectives. So I really try to elevate, highlight, and add readings that focus on identity. So for instance, Beverly Daniel Tatum's Complexity of Identity. Ibram X. Kendi, number of students have started reading his book in AUX this year. So I'm less likely to assign the whole book, but I have assigned selected essays. And he now has a current column in The Atlantic. So if you need sort of like a quick snapshot of something, you have some smaller options there. Jeff Chain's We Can Be All Right, Notes on Race and Resegregation. The 1619 Project and the podcast for the 1619 Project have worked well in my classes. But this is definitely one of the trickier, more challenging aspects of a CBL class. So this is the point that we kind of want to open it up to questions, concerns, that sort of thing. What are people thinking here? Okay. 1691, yes. The 1619 Project was put out by the New York Times last summer. If you click the link, it should take you to the PDF of the project, which you do not need a subscription for. All of the essays in the project are pretty short. They're about a page long. And they're from predominantly Black and African American writers and scholars and artists who are all looking at a specific aspect of how has slavery and post-1619 America affected the African American and Black community. So for instance, in Complex Problems, we read the one on health and how the health of African Americans and Black people is genuinely different in many, many ways than white people. And for 19-year-old students who are reading that in Complex Problems, it's an eye-opening essay to realize that medical students are not given diversity training, that the African American mortality rate in childbirth is so much higher than it is for a white woman to give birth. The podcast, there's almost always a podcast that correlates to specific reading. So especially because this is a much heavier text than many of our students are familiar with, especially when talking about race and slavery. I encourage students to read, okay, you can either read the health essay in 1619, or you can listen to the podcast. They cover almost the same material. Does that help, Rebecca? Rebecca's first name on this is Hazen, correct? Okay. Other concerns or questions? Rebecca Hazen, got it. Okay, thank you. Marcy, do you want to talk about how you've approached this with some of your classes?
So one of the things I've done is, because it's so important to understand the history of the Latino community and why is it that in somewhere around 1980, you know, the number of Latinos from Central America grew exponentially in this area, is I have my students in small groups with one Spanish speaker in each group interview the Aramark janitorial staff to understand, like, when did you come to DC? Did you have a relative here? What kind of a job did you have? How'd you end up working at AU? Because in this case, history and the role of US foreign policy is so important in understanding the immigrant community. I also then, later on in the semester, when we're talking about like the more recent waves of young people, unaccompanied minors visiting the community, moving to the DC area to reconnect with family members and escape violence and various factors, I bring in like four or five young people who I've made connections with over the years, some of them in high school, some go to UDC, and they speak and share their experience. So those are two of the ways I try and make some of this stuff a little more real to them.
Cool.
I mean, we also do some activities related, after they read the article I sent out by Beverly Tatum, I also ask them in class in small groups to talk about their own identities and what are the dominant identities and the subordinate identities that Beverly Tatum works on. And it's very interesting.
I also share with them,
The range of experiences and what are at different ages, what are the identities that people really resonate with.
yeah. I also share with them something, when Beverly Daniel Tatum visited AU in spring 2019, she told the AU community that she has been studying race in the college classroom for 30 years. And she said that nothing has changed in how we talk about race. She said that at some point she thought students would become more comfortable talking about race in the classroom, and they have not. So I phrase it to my students this way. We are going to have uncomfortable conversations about race and identity in the classroom. And my goal in them is not to make you feel unhappy or like you were to blame for your privilege, but to think about how is this affecting your community-based work and how can you do better in the community now. Our students,
Sorry.
I think all of us, if we're listening to our students, especially the undergrads now, are asking for more equitable AU. And I think we have a responsibility to listen to them and to try to have these conversations if we can in a way that makes sense for our courses, especially if we're doing CBL. Sorry.
I also want to emphasize, I know that not everybody feels like they have the background or expertise to guide the conversations. The Center for Diversity and Inclusion, it has a newsletter. I highly recommend everybody subscribe to it. They do a variety of workshops and students can go in, so you could almost make that be a requirement. You just have to work with them ahead of the time, put it in your syllabus. Take the Unpacking Your Privilege workshop, or there's 5 or 6 different ones. And I think, you know, if you give people the chance to either get credit for it or write a short essay in response to it, there are other resources on campus. So it's not like every single faculty member is going to be able to do all of this themselves.
Totally. They're also getting a lot of this in AUX too. So that's something to keep in mind if you have undergrads. Some of them will come in and they will be able to talk to you immediately about privilege. Some of them are reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi in AUX too. So the other thing is to keep in mind that students will be very excited to have these conversations and the others will be very turned off because they are very tired of talking about this. So have fun with that challenge. It's something we're all struggling with CBL classes. Okay, so another thing that especially with talking about some of these more complicated issues, reflection and critical thinking. We have to blow through this section. So if you have questions, let us know in the chat. But Marcy and I both think balance with reflection is important. Giving your students places for formal and informal forms of reflection, and it pays off in terms of student impact. Marcy, do you want to add anything here?
So I think what has been a challenge I've heard from different faculty different times is like talking and reflection and small group activities in class take time. So that does sometimes cut short some of the content-based instruction that you're used to doing. And that, I think that's part of what the balance issue is. Like, we think it's so important to include it, but something is gonna take a toll, you know? And I just think we need to be prepared for it as we start to move to these other models where there is small group work and report out and giving a chance to students to share what they're going through and what's working and what's not working and what their observations are. And sometimes obviously small group is better than tell everybody 25 people in the class, because you know they're touchy, sensitive issues. So that's why I like the small group option. So people who don't feel comfortable talking in front of everybody can share, and then maybe someone in the group can report out for the small group.
Agreed. Okay, so next couple of slides, we have some examples. In my writing class and CP, I have students do a before, during, end reflection. These are sort of like journal entries. They have to include 1 to 2 CB concepts. So course reading, a podcast, something we've specifically talked about in class, their CBL experience, a co-curricular, something to that effect. So just giving a quick snapshot of what the before prompt looks like, what the during prompt looks like. If you want more examples of those, if you click that link, it takes you to a Google Drive. You are welcome to revise, adapt, steal, etc., any of those materials. Okay. Next one. Other thing that I think really helps, I think faculty sometimes get hung up on reflection and think that everything needs to be a paper or it needs to be evaluated. Give your students 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of class once a week, just an informal reflection. So this is something we started doing in my complex problems class last spring, and I started doing it in the writing class and complex problems this year, and it's a hit with students. Basically, I will take pictures from the nonprofit social media because they love to use my students on their social media font for some reason. And I will throw them up on a slide, and I will have some questions about CBL. So this was a couple weeks in. How has CBL changed? What are you struggling with? What do you need advice on? What's going on with the commute? So for instance, the W8 bus line the students were taking from the Metro apparently stopped coming at the published times at some point last spring. So it was helpful for all the students to hear this together and realize, oh, the one app many of us were using no longer updates. We need to start using a different app. So also, again, crowdsourcing what works for most of us, and they feel supported. Marcy, do you want to add anything here?
Oh, that's great.
Cool. Final project. I think this is the other thing that a lot of us could get more creative with and have some fun with. So their final project in complex problems was a multimodal narrative. So it's basically a reflection project, but it's talking about what they want to focus on. They're telling the story of their CBL experience. So the multimodal part is where students get to have a little bit of fun. And it actually worked really well with being online this spring. Students were able to do podcasts. They were able to do videos. Some people went more basic and did a PowerPoint. Basically, they chose a mode that helped them highlight what they wanted to reveal about their experience. So you can see the prompt there, and there are some examples of the final projects from this semester and the last few semesters. The one that really surprised me this year, a number of students wanted to write poetry. So I had 3 poets this spring decide to write poetry about their community-based learning experience. There were a number of students that did academic posters using the academic poster maker and the makerspace in the library last year. 2 of the best ones were from English language learners. So I think this is the other thing. The multimodal project was accessible to no matter who was in my classroom. So the students that were frustrated about always having to write a paper for classes or always having to take a test, they had a different way of demonstrating their knowledge. So it got really exciting. I'm really proud of the examples if you take a look at the link. Marcy, this is you.
So I've had students over the years work at a charter school called Next Step Public Charter School. And for those who aren't familiar with it, we have a whole bunch of charters in DC, but several are particularly oriented towards the immigrant community and slightly older, like they're more for 16 to 24 years old, because in some of the traditional high schools, there wouldn't be an easy place for them. The curriculum sometimes have to do with like technology or health or different particular skills. So I had a student who was doing some tutoring at Next Step, which is right at the corner of 15th and Irving Street Northwest. And then I would have everybody write a reflection about their experience on Blackboard. And I'll just quickly read this. To me, just was very powerful. I will never complain ever again, not about my schoolwork, not about my job, not about my lack of sleep, not about anything in my perfectly perfect life. Today was the first day I really got to know Glenda and Cecilia, the 2 women I tutor for the Spanish GED. Glenda, a 24-year-old mother of an adorable 5-year-old, wakes up every day at 3 a.m. so she can get to her job in Silver Spring, which starts at 6. She gets off at 4, then goes to the charter school from 6 to 9 p.m. She goes to bed at 11, then starts the cycle all over. Eres super mujer was the only response I could gasp out, which is, you're a superwoman. Cecilia, 20 years old, wakes up at 3 a.m. every morning so she can get to her job at a fruit packing factory in Baltimore, which starts at 6. She also gets off at 4, commutes back to DC to attend school from 6 to 9 p.m. She goes to bed at 10 or 11 and does it all over again 6 days a week. These women had patiently listened to me complain about how tired I was from my classes and schoolwork with complete and utter genuine sympathy so many times when their lives and situations were so much worse. I know now who my heroes are. Because of the cards I was dealt, I am not them, but I easily could have been. I think it speaks for itself.
Marcy, this is you. Sorry.
No, actually, this is Everett. This is an activity that promotes critical thinking. And I think I've used it in my class, but Everett's going to share how he's used it.
Yeah, so this is actually something that I like to do for, some students who aren't able to take CB courses. CSLP is a really great option. That's the add-on credit I spoke about a little bit earlier. But I mean, obviously reflection is a huge part of CB as well as critical thinking. And this activity is just an activity that I feel like can be used no matter the subject. There's always a problem that we're trying to talk about, discuss, try to find solutions to, whether that's homelessness, poverty, the environment, etc. And so this activity is just one where you get students to have a core problem, you get to write that out, and then they try to decide what some of those root causes that cause the problem are, and then due to that problem, what are the outcomes of it? So like, what are the outcomes of global warming? It's just a really nice way to get students to start critically thinking about, the environment in a little bit more direct way. And a lot of times students come up with the answer that a lot of things are cyclical. And it's just a really great way to be like, okay, so now that we've discussed this, how do we go about approaching the problems or, solving these outcomes? How do the nonprofits we're directly working with, like, where do they fit into this scope? Like, who are the key players? And I think that's really important, especially when you turn that back on them and say, like, also, where do you fall into this? So this is just an example that I thought that could be used across, academic subject matters and things along those lines.
So can I interject a little bit, because I use the problem tree every semester. It gets a little esoteric for some of the students, but there's a great example using the common cold. And then from the example of using the common cold, which is very simple to see the root causes and the symptoms of the root causes, then they're able to move that forward into dealing with more societal problems.
Great idea. So there are on the website, on the CTRL site, pages of reflection activities that you're welcome to tap into. We have other books about them. So if that's something you feel like you need more resources, start there, and then feel free to let Everett or Amanda or I know. Okay.
If you wanted to adapt, steal, whatever, any of my materials, on those slides, there are links to Google Drives that you should all be able to access. If you can't, let me know. And that, I did see a comment in the chat about the law school and how the law school does not have access to Blackboard. So
Everett and I will work on that with Lindsay.
All right. Okay. The Google Drive would be accessible to law school people though. So there's that.
Okay.
Okay.
So that kind of concludes the kind of syllabus reshaping section. So we're just moving into the final phases of this session.
And somehow we're magically maybe somewhat on time.
Yeah, we are.
I would like someone to share this with my students. All right. So Marcy, I believe this is your slide-ish.
Cool. So we have been advocating, lobbying, pushing over the years so that the administration recognizes, values, validates this work, because it is more work. There's just no doubt about it. It's more labor, more time. The impact and the value are clear to all of us, but we also would like it if there was some kind of recognition. So I'm going to tell you of a few things that are underway, and we're going to hope that given all the conditions we're under, they continue to occur in the year to come. So last year, Mary Clark, right before the new provost came on, was like the acting, was the acting provost, and she gave us $1,000 to give out 4 curriculum development grants of $250 each to faculty who were changing a syllabus and incorporating community-based learning. I hope we will have that in the year to come to offer any of you if that is your situation. I did already ask Provost Myers if that was possible, and because of all the financial cutbacks that AU is going through right now, given what's going on, he said he'd like to, but he can't promise it yet. So it might still happen. We may still get a fund, and we'll communicate with you once I know if we actually have it, and we can give that money out sometime between July 2020 and 2021. Okay, so that's a maybe to give out 4 grants. We did get passed through the Faculty Senate a new Community Engaged Faculty Award. And I know there were something like 7 or 9 different nominations of faculty. You know how they do all those faculty awards and people write letters and support them and get back up. I believe they're not going to be announced until July. Normally they would have come out already and there would have been something in May, but because of what's going on. So somebody definitely got that award. I believe it includes compensation, but I have no idea who it is. But I believe they're going to be announced in May, and I don't know if they'll do the ceremony in the fall when we reopen, quote unquote. We've been Dan Myers is a huge advocate of this work and his past institutions. He has really been a supporter, so he gets it, I think, in many ways, and he values it. So what we asked him to do, there's a bunch of us who went, Jane Palmer and Gemma and Garrett Grady Lovelace, we went to him and we said, one of the things we want to know is which faculty are doing any form of community-based learning or service learning or practicums, or even like things like the law school is doing, you know, clinics to involve and support community members or community nonprofits. So we created a survey which exists that would map what's going on and eventually help us better coordinate what sites faculty and students are working at. Because right now it's crazy. Like you could have your students working at, you know, Thrive DC, like Amanda's and Jane's are there, and you might not even know that 2 classes are working with them. We need to, if we really care about impact, we need to better coordinate and make sure we're at the right places and we're providing the right kinds of projects and service. So there is a survey that exists. I thought it was going to go in already, but I'm sure everything got pushed a little bit to the back burner given what's going on, but that will happen. And then there was going to be kind of a forum in which Provost Myers would share what the results were, and then we could start to kind of plan accordingly. There again are two strategic planning committees. One is about partnerships and one is working with DC. And there are people on those committees that are very invested in this work, and we're trying to get metrics that show and demonstrate how we are advancing the strategic plan through this kind of work. There is an inclusive excellence plan, as you probably know, and very often there's discussion about panels and workshops and stuff on campus, but we also want to demonstrate that students who work in DC in different neighborhoods, in different communities around race and class and ethnicity and age issues are also deepening their own competencies. So we're also trying to move it forward so that that community work is valued and validated in the inclusive excellence plan. And then there is kind of a regional committee that's looking at tenure and promotion practices, particularly at institutions where they value community-based learning and community-based research. We don't have that formally written in right now, but, oh no, I'm sorry. That's for tenure faculty. Term faculty, I think, Amanda, you can probably talk about that better than I can. But I know for tenure faculty, there's been efforts, but nothing's become concrete yet. Sorry, Amanda, go ahead.
I do know, and again, this is different by department and school, but at least in CAS, and I believe SOC, maybe Gemma can speak to that, and SPA, community-based learning is being taken into account for service and teaching in the reappointment and promotion process. That said, I think it kind of paves the way if there's anyone else in your program or your school doing this work. I know it was easier when I started teaching these classes 9 years ago because somebody else in writing studies was already teaching this kind of class. but they had actually stopped at that point because of some of the logistical hurdles that they had. I do think the university is finally realizing that if we're saying that we support the DC community and we want our students to think of DC as an experiential learning classroom, they realize they have to support this pedagogy. So.
And two other examples that have come up in our discussions with the provost are, could there be a fund to help students, you know, pay for transportation when they do have to take an Uber or a Lyft because the bus is just not realistic because of time? Could there be a fund to give little stipends to the nonprofits when we invite them to campus and they give us a couple hours to talk about their work? Why can't we give them some funding too? So we've talked about funding, and we've also talked about class size. Could community-based learning classes be capped at 20? Those are all out there. Can't promise anything, especially given what's going on, but we know that all those things are clearer demonstrations of that commitment. Any questions, comments there?
Does anyone want to speak to how this has worked in their schools or departments?
I mean, do you feel it's valued? Do you feel like it's kind of under the radar and you just do it because you know how important it is? But I mean, Gemma we were very lucky. Her dean, before he left, gave her a course release to be a faculty fellow, right? And that meant that one less course, but you were able to collaborate with our office. We have not achieved that for next year. I've made the request, but again, all these things have financial implications. And right now, I think the university is just worried about how much money it's losing.
But it's a great opportunity. I'm so sad it's over. It's 2 amazing years of work, I think, that we've done and collaborated with Marcy and Everett and everyone at the Center for Community Engagement. It's really been, I've been teaching, this class for a long time, and it's been a community-based class for many, many years, but being the faculty member, faculty fellow was very special. I think we did some great initiatives that'll be around for a long, long time. And I think if any of you are interested, you should go to your deans and express your passion and your desire to do this. Because it really does empower you as a faculty member. And it also, it lets your deans know how important this is. And now I'm thrilled that it's now the provost has acknowledged to have a community engaged faculty award. That's a big deal. It means the university recognizes how important it is to work with the community.
Mm-hmm.
So Marcy has a few more resources for people.
So these are just 3 links that later on you can click on. The first one is our website. We have readings, we have learning outcomes, we have deadlines, we have conferences. So, just going to the Center for Community Engagement and Service, our website, you'll see a lot about all our programs, including CBLR, and all those nonprofit directories are always up there. National Campus Compact is a group of 1,100 campuses. They have great resources and conferences, and also just new ideas and awards. They also offer awards. And then our regional campus compact is called Mid-Atlantic, and it's Delaware, Maryland, and DC. Very strange combination, but we meet regularly. They also give mini grants, they give out awards. They are now convening groups to talk about working with DC public schools. Sometimes they have convened groups to talk about reflection activities. So they're just great. All of them would be great to tap into, and the latter 2 are listserv. You can get their monthly newsletters, and that's helpful too.
The last one too, Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic. I believe if you follow that link, it'll also bring you to information about the Service Learning and Civic Engagement Conference, which is almost always in the area and a place our students can travel to. Last fall, it was at UMD. It was at AU in 2015. Sometimes it's a little further. So there was one on the Eastern Shore a few years ago, which was a bit much. But I have started adding it if it's local enough, and if CSAS can reimburse students for transportation or give transportation to students. I've started adding to the syllabus, and I have probably 2 to 8 students every semester participate. and they love it. Just seeing how this is connected to other schools and how other universities are doing this, other disciplines are doing it. There's poster sessions, which are a great fit for students. They can submit a panel with you. They can submit a panel with other classmates or students across the university. There's so many options. But I think it's exciting for students to see the possibilities of this field.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. I think, yeah, there's students presenting at conferences is pretty powerful. And yeah, there are a lot of options. We also pay the student registration. And if it's close by, we'll take them in a van. So yeah, keep in touch with us about that if you're interested in that. I hope there'll be one in the fall. I haven't seen a location yet.
Exactly.
Okay, I think those are our resources. And Everett.
Oh, so these are just our upcoming events and deadlines. Obviously, it's tentative because we're not quite sure yet what the fall semester looks like. But just keep in mind that we have a community partner faculty brunch that is usually the first week of August, or the first week of classes, excuse me. There's that student activity fair where we usually bring about 20 community partners onto AU's campus, so that way students and faculty can connect and reach out. If you decide that CB is not an option for the fall semester, the community service learning program will be still running. So if students are looking to do service, or if you'd like to put some of that information on your syllabi, definitely reach out and we'll send that your way. And then that is really kind of it. It goes into the spring semester after that, but it seems a little far to talk about those details.
I just also wanted to mention that we already have the CB classes for the fall. So assuming we're here, and I think they are leaning towards some kind of hybrid that some people will be here, I think it would be good to, if you don't already have a CB class, which chances are you don't, to consider the CSLP add-on credit as a way to kind of try out this new methodology, have a few students in your class do it, and then maybe consider CB for spring 2021, and the application will be up probably in October, but, or January or September. But, now that we have all your names, if you don't mind, we'll add you to our list. But Everett usually goes into all the classes, gives you language for your syllabus to do CSLP. He'll come in and talk to your class and talk about the deadlines and how to go about it, and then welcome students to come into our office in Mary Graydon and look for a community partner and fill out the form by the deadline. So I think if you're kind of checking this out and haven't done it yet, the CSLP add-on credit is probably the best way to go for the fall. And then we can talk about CB for January.
Great. One last thing, if you're doing student selected, I think those student activity fairs are the perfect place for students to find and do some networking with community organizations that AU has a connection with. My students have found some really good options there before. Okay, so here's the exciting part. And if you have to leave us, we understand. But if you do have questions, comments, if you want us to do some legwork, that sort of thing. Ooh, I think Luis has the lower hand up, or the raise hand. Oh, so much lingo to learn. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question. So when I submitted my course description to the registrar's office, it was a CB course, and I was planning on developing it as a CB course. But yeah, I guess we have to know at some point whether we're going to meet on campus or not. And if that it worked, basically the university decided that we're not coming back and we're teaching online, how do I go about it? Do I have to contact the registrar's office and let them know that the code for the course is changing and it's not a CB course anymore? What are the steps that we should follow and kind of like the deadlines that we have to bear in mind?
Yeah.
Luis, I'm in this boat too. And I have brought this up with my chairs and my dean already. So I will share with you what I've heard so far.
Thank you.
One, there are no deadlines on this sort of thing because none of us know what this brave new world holds. We do know that the university is supposed to be telling us by early June what the plan is for fall. I think this is something that needs to be on the radar of the remote CBL team, Marcy. You were talking about the person in SPA who's in charge of that committee. I'm in the same boat with Luis about my CP with Horton's kids. And I think there will be quite a few other people, because I don't know if it's going to be feasible for all nonprofits to move remote.
Right. So I promise you, I will get more information and get back to everybody about it.
Got it.
Yeah, I think for people who do project-based work, it might be more feasible to keep that going, but it's still going to be a lot of labor. So yeah, I think you'll have to make, in a way, a personal decision. Do you feel like you can take it on if it's remote, or would you prefer to just not do it in the fall, in which case we'll have to get the CB taken off, right? But I have to say, right now what I'm hearing is hybrid. Like, some students are going to move onto campus, and there's going to be a mix of in-person. Again, things could change, a mix of in-person and remote classes, but it will be far less people on campus because they don't have the space to have people 6 feet apart from each other. So class size is going to change. Every single classroom will be a meeting room on this campus if they go forward with that. But you're right, the announcement will probably be in June.
That is very interesting, because, you know, I heard from a colleague who teaches at GW, and apparently, like, their plan is they are going to conduct like a massive amount of every week, and then they are forging alliances with their own hospitals, since they already have one. But it's interesting to hear that we're moving towards like a hybrid approach, kind of like having the airplane situation.
Yeah, I think nobody wants to have the university completely remote in the fall. It's how many incoming students are going to show up? Who would pay all that money to come to campus if it's all remote?
Absolutely.
So I think they're trying to figure out how many people can actually be first year and second year students be in the dormitories. It's going to be far less people because they can't have any, they don't want to have any shared rooms because parents won't want that. So that's what they're going towards now. Who knows?
Okay.
But yeah, that's what I'm hearing, but nothing's like written in stone. But they do want some people to be on campus, and I think there'll be a mix of online and in-person classes. Yep,
Okay.
that's what they're saying.
And one more question. When I develop my syllabus, do I have to submit it to you guys to get like the last stamp of approval kind of thing, or how does it work? It's my first time. I'm a newbie in this, so.
Yeah, we would like you to submit it. Let's say you have it ready, you know, by August 20th, submit it. I mean, I think it's rare we've ever said to someone, no, this is not acceptable, but certainly as you're working on it, if you say, you know, can you help me with assignments or how to weight this or that, we're happy to work with you on it, just as like we're happy to work with you on community partners and things like that. But what I would love if I could say once you submit the syllabus, I can give you the grant, but I just don't know when Provost will tell me if that's going to be feasible.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure,
This was very helpful.
What else would be helpful to people right now? What questions do people still have? We know this was a lot of information in one day, and this is not something that you just hear about once and you master. I mean, I think this is something that evolves, and we just change our approach as needed.
Well, I never done this course, so it's a little bit hard to imagine how I should come up feasible class. But I think I have to go visit your office and, you know, do planning together how I can implement.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to meet with anyone online or when we're someday allowed to be in the same room again, to share materials, resources, help you troubleshoot things. I think the big thing that I've had to accept is there will be something in every CB class that I am not prepared for that I kind of have to figure out as it happens. Whether that's going online or the different challenges identity and race present to my students, or whatever the challenge is with Metro and funding. So
now I actually teach studio art.
Oh.
So yes, I mean, I see a lot of opportunity like identity development through art. but I just cannot imagine how I can really involve community and student can volunteer or intern for, the community partners. So,
So the one idea that I have off the top of my head, I know there are multiple tutoring and mentoring organizations that work with young adults that would love some kind of help in terms of art. There is one organization, I'm working with some students that have accommodations through ASAC. The organization is called Eye to Eye, and it partners students with disabilities in high school with college students with disabilities, and they work on art projects.
Oh, wonderful.
So that might be really simply a way to get your students like, okay, maybe your studio art students go in and do a lesson, and then the students from AU that are in Eye to Eye then help the high school students work through that. That might be a model.
Great, and I also know that DC government have a lot of public art project funding opportunities, and I'm wondering if I can connect the grant to the thing.
I
Because
think
you guys talked about out of box.
I think that's the big thing, especially right now. Just thinking about the different ways that we connect this work and use your networks. I found some links, especially since the pandemic started online with remote CBL options. People on Twitter, I tagged it, I used the right hashtags, and people sent me some opportunities. So I think especially if you're talking about taking advantage of DC grants, definitely start looking at your network and who might have information that would be helpful to you.
Great, thank you.
Other questions, comments, anything? Well, I think we are drawing to an end. It is exactly, what, 4:26 or something? So if nobody has anything else, I know that Lindsay, that CTRL is going to send out an evaluation form. We will also send around the PowerPoint. We're absolutely available, whether you want to talk by phone or Teams or Zoom or email about ideas. And I promise you the stuff about the fall and the remote versus the hybrid, we're all dying to know. But yes, we need to rethink what the fall is going to look like and do something everybody can handle and is comfortable with. There's no doubt that there is some need in the community, and we're in touch with a lot of nonprofits, but they're also kind of struggling to figure out what they can handle at a distance. So still so much to come to be decided. But thank you all. Thanks to all the participants for sticking with us.
Great. Thank you to Marcy